Neighbors can be nightmares. After all, they're just people and people can be inconsiderate. There are hundreds of articles and stories online about neighbors from hell, but Melissa's neighbors were something else. And having moved to California from Kansas City, she soon discovered that her neighbors were jerks. The boulder blocked her driveway constantly. However, she was about to show them what it means to mess with a geologist. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. There are many things you could do to annoy your neighbors or to upset the people who live in your neighborhood. Whether it is being rowdy late at night, being nosy and sticking their nose in where it doesn't belong. Most bad neighbors are simply rude and inconsiderate. But what makes it worse is that if no one takes a proper stand, these inconsiderate people will simply carry on doing what they do, even if people have spoken to them. Melissa was no stranger to having problems with neighbors, but when she moved into her home while studying, she didn't expect any trouble. It was hard at work on her third degree when first and second year students moved in next door. She was worried about getting new neighbors. However, everything was fine. That changed, however, when they started to block their driveway. When finding her new roommates, Melissa had been very fortunate indeed. She and her roommates respected each other, including their quirks, schedules, and personal spaces. This avoided conflicts about noise, chores, sores, or any of the typical issues with roommates. This was something they all realized and remarked upon more than once. All of them knew how lucky they were to have found such respectful and like-minded people. When a group of undergraduate students moved in next door, Melissa was understandably wary at first. However, it seemed that she'd been lucky yet again, as everything was fine. What neither she nor her roommates knew was that this was simply the calm before the storm. "I never really had any issue until about a week and a half ago," Melissa wrote in a social media post. This is actually the second time this has happened. It is quite common for undergraduates to host raucous parties, more often than graduate students do. One of the reasons is that grad students have gotten it out of their systems and are more used to the freedoms of living alone. In her post, Melissa stated that they've generally been pretty considerate with noise and keeping people out of our yard. Then the boulder appeared. One night, however, while her neighbors were having a party, Melissa noticed that one of her neighbor's guests had blocked their driveway with their car. Melissa, not being unreasonable, went over and politely asked that they didn't block the driveway. When she got up the next morning, the car was no longer there. However, in its place was a huge boulder. Melissa worked hard at her studies, so at the end of the day she loved nothing more than some peace and quiet, reading a book. Melissa woke up early one morning, got ready to go out, only to discover that once she reached her car there was a large boulder near her tire, blocking her in. However, as it would turn out, this wasn't some random boulder. It was clear that the neighbors had felt that the rock was in their way, so they decided to move it instead. However, they had chosen to move the rock to Melissa's side of the fence. Needless to say, she immediately went to knock on her neighbor's door, but to no avail. While there had never been a problem with the rock before, today there was. By the look of it, someone had felt that the rock was in their way and had moved it to make their life simpler. However, they had caused a problem for Melissa. Whoever had moved it didn't seem concerned about the fact that it was on Melissa's side of the fence, and they had unthinkingly dumped it straight into Melissa's path. To make it worse, they had all seemed quite happy to accommodate her when she'd asked them not to block her in the night. Not that the fact that she had been blocked in and couldn't pull out her car was an annoyance. However, it would soon become clear that both the rock and the problem she was facing were much bigger than they thought. Now, despite her most valiant efforts, Melissa simply could not remove the rock by herself. She went to the neighbor's house and knocked on the door, hoping to get some help with this situation. Instead of being greeted by a friendly neighbor, she was greeted with nothing but silence. Eventually, Melissa got help to put the rock back in the proper place. But the whole situation would soon go from careless and inconsiderate to downright intolerable. Her rude neighbors had a crazy party one night. She had gone over to ask them to make sure no cars would be blocking her driveway in the morning so she could leave for work. But when she woke up and went to her car, there was the boulder. This time, Melissa knew that the giant rock had definitely ended up there on purpose, where her rowdy neighbors had moved the boulder there to get back at her for simply asking them to make sure her car wasn't blocked. She knew that if she moved the boulder back to where it was supposed to be, it would eventually end up on her side of the fence again. It turns out that Melissa's neighbors had seriously underestimated her. She was a very petty person, so they might have thought they could get away with making her life inconvenient, and she wouldn't be able to do a thing about it. But what they had failed to remember was that Melissa was, in fact, a geologist. And that means she had access to a professional auto chipper, which had the power to drill through stone and pulverize it in a matter of minutes. So she hauled out her extremely loud stone drilling machine at 7:30 a.m., cranked it up to the highest setting, and proceeded to obliterate the pesky boulder into a pile of rubble. And so, she got to work destroying the boulder like a total boss. Before long, that pesky boulder was just a pile of rubble, which she kindly swept over to her neighbors. Melissa is incredibly intelligent and knew that if she was going to cause so much noise, had to do it within acceptable hours. As the noise ordinance stops at 7 a.m., she started at 7:30 and worked on the boulder for 4 hours. Melissa could have waited until later in the afternoon to create a huge noise so as not to wake her neighbors, but why not get back at them by blasting the rock to bits early in the morning as they're trying to sleep off the effects of the previous night's festivities? After Melissa destroyed the boulder and gave the boys an early morning wake-up call, she sat down to enjoy a cup of tea. However, what made things even sweeter was the fact that she was able to kick back and know that these rowdy students were going to think twice from now on. Considering that this was the second time that Melissa's car had been blocked in, she was happy to see that her neighbors might have finally gotten the hint. Knowing that this was a unique story, Melissa decided to do a live feed on her Twitter account about the entire thing. But before the questions came flooding in, people online couldn't help but retweet her updates, and before she knew it, the story blew up. Who knows if it was Melissa's shameless attitude or her tweets that made the story go viral? In any event, who doesn't like to see a comical form of revenge? Being that Melissa is legitimately a volcanologist, she knows her way around her fair share of boulders. She also happens to have access to a very loud auto chipper at 7:30 a.m. So Melissa honestly had no issue with her neighbors until about a week and a half before this particular incident, when they blocked her car in because they didn't want the boulder in their own driveway. Everyone loves a good rivalry story, so it wasn't that surprising when people started tweeting at Melissa asking her questions about the incident. They wanted to know why Melissa's neighbors had done this in the first place. There had to be a good reason for the rock. They got beef with you or what? I've never heard of somebody moving a rock in front of a random person's car just for kicks before, one person asked. But surprisingly, Melissa answered most of the questions that were being asked. She responded to the tweets explaining why her neighbors had done what they had done, explaining sarcastically what a horrible lady she was. What's about? Sadly, yes, I am the evil lady who requests that if they have a party and people park in the driveway, that they move the cars by 7 a.m. so I can get out. I'm a horrid person, she wrote. The praise Melissa received was unreal. The only part I'm disappointed with is that you weren't doing this at 5 a.m., one person wrote. Melissa wasn't expecting this response when she had originally posted the story. She didn't know that people would find it so funny, but the attention she received was overwhelming. She commented on how she had gained hundreds of followers since the story spread and hopes that she can serve as a role model for young girls to become scientists.